Welcome back to the Hardware Unboxed podcast for episode 106. We're going to be talking a little bit about game ownership in the face of Sony cancelling the production of physical media in 2028. So talk a little bit about that from the perspective of a PC game. We'll also be talking about the future of GPU hardware and games. We have a pretty broad-ranging discussion about those sort of things based on Steve's video from a couple of weeks ago looking at the challenges that Nvidia are facing with GeForce GPUs. So let's get into it. I should start off this podcast episode by just apologizing to people for my voice. I'm a little bit sick this week, so I don't sound 100% normal. I probably even look a little bit sick. That's just the life of getting sick in the wintertime here in Australia. It's actually very cold here today. It's been interesting whenever we go to like conferences and stuff. We talk to people about like the Australian weather, and we mention in the winter it actually does get cold. So it's 6 degrees Celsius at my house outside right now, which is pretty cold. So I'm not loving life at the moment with my sickness and things being quite cold. But how are you doing? I'm assuming that you've been feeling not as bad as I feel right now.
Hard to say.
Wow, confident answer.
I have been sick myself. I did the Moore's Law is Dead podcast feeling pretty rough, but we got through that okay. Yeah, a couple of cold and flu tablets and you're good to go. I don't know if it's my sort of rusty voice or my hangover, my benchmark hangover that's weighing me down the most right now. So I've had a bit of a hectic week. Obviously, we did the 13,000 word motherboard roundup video, which took it out of me. Well, I was feeling okay when I did that. Then I got a bit sick. And I reckon for the Assassin's Creed content, I probably had somewhere in the range of 1,000 throat clears for recording that.
Wow.
So like that. Yeah. I was very hoarse by the end of that one. So if you can hear my voice sort of changing throughout that one, it was a bit of a struggle, but feeling okay at this point in time. We've got the podcast to do, Tim. I was really hoping you would carry this one and I would just sit there nodding along, but it sounds like we're going to have to try and contribute at least equally.
Well, that's the life of doing the podcast. No, it's good to see the motherboard testing video finally get published. And I thought it wouldn't do that well, but it has actually done better than I expected in terms of like views and reception, that sort of thing, especially because at the moment, the interest in motherboards is pretty dire. Not a lot of people are buying motherboards at the moment, especially high-end boards, especially AM5 boards where you need to buy new DDR5 memory. But it seems like a lot of people were actually interested to sit down and watch an hour and a half of you running through all the different boards that you've tested. So, hey, a bit of a success on that video, which is, I guess, pretty nice.
Yes, I was very surprised by how well that content did at this point in time. It did probably better than I would have expected, even if it had been a period where people were actively interested in buying motherboards and doing upgrades and PC related business. So yeah, that's a huge win because as I said, I started that video it was about 9 months prior to it going live. And back then it made sense to do like a part 2 update, look at the other boards that we didn't include in part 1. So I thought, you know what, I'll invest the time in this. I don't know how long it'll take. And that is one of the bigger challenges with these motherboard roundups at this point in time, because people get annoyed that it takes so long, but I'm sitting here like, when do I actually publish this thing? Because there's always another motherboard either just being announced or just coming out. And I'll speak with the various companies involved and they'll say, oh, well, next month we're releasing this new exciting model. So could you wait for that? And I don't want to do 6 of these videos where we add 4 or 5 or whatever amount of boards every single time. So one of the greater challenges for that content isn't just the enormous amount of time and energy that goes into making it. It's actually getting all of the motherboards, whether that's waiting for them to come out or just actually sourcing them all, because it's pretty difficult to get all of these boards. It does tend to cost us a lot of money because we can't get all of them most of the time from the companies. So anyway, it's sort of content I do enjoy doing. I think it's content that's fairly unique and the reception from the viewers is really positive. So I feel like first and foremost, that's why I want to make the content if it's well received and people really enjoy it. So that's why we keep making those videos, even though it is definitely a negative return on investment for us. There's just no way we profit from that content, not even close. I don't even want to think about how much of a loss that sort of content would run at when you tally up the time involved and all of that. But
Hey, sign
that's
up to
fine.
the Patreon. Sign up to the Patreon because that can offset some of the losses of making videos like that.
Well, they're the kind of guys that I do that content for because, they really appreciate it. It's heavily requested from them. And it's often the guys that are in Discord that are constantly asking me, when's this content coming out? Are you doing it for this chipset? Are you doing that? And I'm like, I'm working on it, guys. I'm trying to get it done. So yeah, that was a mega one, biggest one we've done so far. And yeah, there's a lot of boards in it.
Yeah, so I think the topic that I want to talk about to start off this video is probably the hottest topic in gaming right now across all of gaming, and that is Sony deciding to cancel physical game production. They might be wondering, why is a PC hardware podcast going to talk about a console-related topic? But I think it's pretty interesting to talk about from the perspective of PC gamers, considering that on PC, digital game sales have sort of been the norm for at least the last, I don't know, 15 to 20 years. I remember in the very early days of when I was playing games on PC, you could buy physical games, but it was still usually a system of, you had the installer on the physical media, but then there was like a code as well that you'd have to put into the installer. And so you effectively were sort of kind of in a way buying a license as well as you had this physical product. But obviously for console gamers, things have gone very, very differently with access to both digital platforms and physical for a while now. So yeah, Sony is ending physical game production in 2028. All games that are going to be released between now and then will have a physical and digital option, at least for the games that wanted to have a physical option. But then beyond that point, physical media will no longer be available. I think there's been a lot of implications for that with next generation consoles being digital only, the sort of discussion around ownership of games versus buying a license to all that sort of thing. And so as someone that is a known console hater and someone that has been playing PC games for the longest time now, I'm interested to hear your thoughts, I guess just some brief opening thoughts on what you think about the ending of physical games for PlayStation, how that differs for sort of PC with our digital Steam libraries and stuff like that.
Yeah. So firstly, did you hear me talk with Tom about this at all?
I did listen to the podcast, and I hear that you had some thoughts on there as well. Yep. But I thought, we've got our own podcast. We can't just let Tom have all the cool topics.
No, that's okay. Because I have thought about it a little bit more since then, and I saw some of the feedback to it. It's a topic I just don't really care about. Whether or not that's right or wrong, I don't know. Like, obviously, I'm a PC gamer. If when you look back, and I forget the way things were. I've been doing this job for over 20 years now, and I forget the way we used to do some things, or some of the things we used to have to do, and whatnot. And then we look at some of the hardware that's come along over the years. For example, like one of the biggest improvements, one of the biggest changes to PC hardware was the invention of the SSD, right? Just massively, radically improved desktop computing overnight. Just so much better. And for me, another one of those, I wouldn't put it in that category, but something that really improved the convenience of what I do was a platform like Steam. Digitally downloading the games, having them auto update, all that sort of stuff made my job so much easier. And I found gaming just much more convenient, more enjoyable, less of a chore. So looking back, it wasn't this painful sort of process where we were giving up the discs and whatnot. Like I said, I think the last game I bought the disc for was StarCraft 2, and I think I just bought that just to have a physical copy of the game because I loved it so much. I definitely downloaded it using Battle.net or whatever. But it's not this painful process that I look back on saying, it sucked when we gave up that on, I got rid of my optical disc drive or whatever. It was something that I just welcomed. It's been nothing but a positive since it happened. And I never sit here going, I wish I had a disc for Windows, or I wish I had a disc for this or that. It's just, they're not things I want in my life. So I do not at all understand the outrage there. Now, the ownership side of things, totally understand, totally get on board with, but wanting to have a physical copy of a game, and most of the arguments that I've seen, either they don't understand what they're arguing or they just want to be outraged for the sake of being outraged. Because Balin informs me that in the example of his PlayStation, for example, all the games he's bought, the game's not on the disc anyway. It's like you download the game, so it's like it guides you to where you would download the game, which makes sense, right? Because a lot of these games you can't play without them being up to date and stuff. So you'd have to download day one patches and following patches and all that sort of stuff.
I think to clarify, most games these days require some form of internet download. I don't think they have to download the entire game, but usually there is like a significant day one patch or online connectivity is required. And then even on the PlayStation, a lot of games you have to download it from the disc to the console to play it. So while you're not necessarily downloading it from the internet, you still have to install the game. You don't just put the disc in and then suddenly the game starts working. You know, the PS5 is built around playing off an SSD, not a physical disc. So
I think
they do need to do this copy process.
Yeah, I think some people were attributing the fact that if you have a physical disc, therefore you own the game and can't lose it. But if it requires the internet to work or some sort of server-side thing for the game to run, then no, you don't technically own it, because if they shut that service down, then the game would have to be patched in a way to allow you to play it offline or whatever. But again, I understand that issue and I agree with those concerns. It's for me, that's an entirely separate issue. Like, you're conflating two things. Like, you're saying, as long as we get a disc, therefore we own the game. And I don't think that's the case at all. And I don't want the disc. I would rather own the game, but do so digitally. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think there's probably 3 or 4 different angles/issues with the loss of physical media. So I think you've brought up probably 2 of them. One of them is sort of the convenience side of things. Like, is it better in terms of, like, imagine there was no issues with pricing or ownership or whatever, and it was just which of these things is better to play games? I would say digital, hands down, is the better experience.
Not even close, yeah.
Easy, you know, you can use your library, at least on PC, right? I think I think if you have a Sony account, and you had multiple consoles, you can just easily install it on multiple consoles as well. But obviously on PC, very easy. You just download Steam. All your games are accessible right there. If you've got a fast enough internet, which I think most gamers have reasonable internet these days, you know, it's a very simple process. As you mentioned, everything's up to date. The games just launch. And yeah, on console, this process of having to still install the game off the disc, I think on Nintendo consoles, it's a bit different. You can sort of put in the game cartridge and it just works. But certainly installing it off a disc is not like a great experience. And then you have to go find where you've stored your disc, because the disc still has to be in the console to play it. The console is loud,
so
spinning up the disc. Yeah, I mean,
it's like it's weird.
Yeah, it is sort of an ancient sort of way of going about things. The second angle with, I think all the other angles are probably a bit more valid when it comes to ownership. I think one of the things that you didn't really talk about there was, at least with a physical copy of a game, you can share the game with your mates, which you can't necessarily do with a digital copy. Steam does have some family sharing systems, but it's a little bit more restricted than just, here's my physical copy, put that in your PlayStation, and now you can play this game, which I guess some people like to do that, and it does strengthen the value of having a physical copy. So in a sense, that is ownership, but it's not necessarily ownership in the sense that, if they shut down the servers and they prevent you from downloading the required parts of the game, you don't actually own, like, you can't use that game forever, which is, I guess, where those like Stop Killing Games initiatives come from. This whole, we need to have access to the things that we've purchased after support ends, because there have been countless examples of games where you buy it and then, years later they just end support. So you can't play it anymore. You can't use it. Your purchase is now effectively over. And then we saw Sony as well recently start revoking rights to access media that people had downloaded, movies and things like that. They just started deleting it from people's libraries. Obviously, that's unacceptable. So there's that concern. And I guess the other angle is sort of the thing where I feel the PC platform differs a lot from consoles, which is the pricing side of things and the sort of competition in terms of digital accessibility. Because on a console, you've got one option, right? You've got the PlayStation Store. That's your way to access digital games. And so you're kind of beholden to Sony wanting to discount games or whatever Sony wants to do in terms of pricing of products. Whereas on PC, obviously most people use Steam, but there's a lot of other storefronts that you can use. So you can just buy game keys from other retailers, some legitimate, some less legitimate, that will give you a Steam key that you can put into Steam and get games. You don't necessarily have to buy it directly from Steam. But then you've got all those other storefronts like GOG, and you've got the Epic Games Store. And, we were just testing Assassin's Creed, which you can purchase through the Ubisoft Connect or Uplay Store, whatever it's called these days. And so there's a bit more, I guess, competition to keep pricing in check on PC, which is why you see a lot of sales, and there's not as much of this situation where games that are 2 years old are still sold for the full retail price. Pricing is much more competitive than you see on PlayStation. So if you've got this system where physical media is sort of, I guess, keeping things competitive in terms of pricing, like there is some price competition between stores selling retail copies, then you remove all of that, then games are probably going to be more expensive for console owners, which I guess is worse. So do you think that maybe there needs to be changes for Sony owners so that there's more competition put into the way they can buy digital games?
I mean, sure, but you're buying a PlayStation, right? So I'm not sure what you're expecting there. And again, my opinion's worthless on this, right? I haven't even touched a PlayStation pretty much ever. So I'm not interested in consoles, not interested in console gaming, haven't done it since I was a kid. So like I said to Tom, I said, given the option, probably don't even want to wait in this conversation because I just don't care. And at the risk of offending people who have a strong opinion on this, I don't even care to argue with them on it. It's just, I'm saying I'm ignorant of the facts here. I don't know what I'm talking about. I haven't used physical media for well over a decade now, and I don't want to use it again, given the option. Whether or not that's the wrong way of going about it, I don't know, but I've tried both, and I like the current setup. I don't wish to do it differently, and I'm a little bit surprised by the backlash to getting rid of the physical media, but again, it's just because I was happy to part with it and not deal with it doesn't mean that that was necessarily the right thing or whatever. It's just people have very strong opinions about this stuff, and I'm trying to say I'm not the person to weigh in on it. So if I'm upsetting your opinion on it, it's whatever. But I don't know. I don't know what to say, Tim. I spoke with Tom about it, and I'm just I really don't know what more to say about this topic. I just don't care. I don't know. And I don't feel like by saying I don't care, it's not like saying I don't care about this company screwing over customers or something like that. I don't view it as that. I don't feel like anyone's getting screwed over here. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly understand the perspective of gamers getting screwed over from the pricing side of things because, yeah, like I said, if games are more expensive digitally than they are buying a physical copy, then in a sense they are getting screwed over if the cheapest way to access games was physical previously.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's what happens though. It's if I'm not saying it's a good thing, but you bought a PlayStation, it's not a situation where there were multiple stores when you bought the PlayStation. That's the impression I'm under. So,
well, there was one digital store, but I guess do you count multiple physical retailers like JB Hi-Fi versus EB Games here in Australia? Is that a difference in retailer, or is that all sold through Sony, I guess?
Yeah, what I'm getting at is because I don't know the answer. I'm talking about a subject I have no knowledge of because I've not done it and don't care. You might as well ask me about ballet because I might have more thoughts there. But
I should ask you about
Well,
That's a different podcast.
honestly, I'd probably rather talk about that than PlayStation's. But what I'm getting at is you've bought into a closed ecosystem. Was it open when you bought it, or was it a closed ecosystem when you bought it? And is it still that today? Like, I wouldn't recommend you buy a PlayStation. So, like, I would always advocate for either building your own PC or buying a PC because it's just so much better at so many different things. But if you just want a game and you want it simple and you want a PlayStation, then buy a PlayStation. But like, I'm telling you to do exactly what I do. Like, I'm not being a hypocrite here. I'm saying don't buy a PlayStation. I've never bought a PlayStation. Don't care about the PlayStation. So it's hard to have a conversation with me about this. So you're probably better off just giving your opinions on it rather than asking me what I think about it. Because again, my opinion's probably wrong anyway, because I've not used one and don't care about them. And I don't know all the facts, like what stores were available, what's available now, what the pricing's like. Has it gone up or down? I have no insight, no knowledge, nothing.
I think one of the more interesting topics is more around the ownership of the games, though, as opposed to, whether people are, does it count that it's a closed system or is it an open system on PlayStation or whatever? I think that a lot of this, I guess, backlash to it, as far as what I've sort of listened to or seen from people talking about it, is sort of the fear of what could happen now that they're taking away options from gamers, right? So sort of this idea that, well, previously, whether or not people actually owned or did not own the games, the physical copies, whether you needed downloads or not downloads, people felt like they had a physical object that they could use to play games. And so that gave them
security. Don't take away our false sense of security.
Well, yes, in a sense, yes, right. I think a lot of the fear is that, Sony or Steam, Valve could do this, any platform could do this, right, is take away access to games that you have paid for, because you are not buying, you're not owning the games when you buy them. You're not getting this sort of, it's not like a book, right, where you buy a book, you can read it whenever you want, you can sell it on, you can give it to someone else.
Unless you've got an Amazon Kindle.
Unless you've got an Amazon Kindle. I mean, that's the way of all things, right, these days. It's like buying a DVD back in the day. Now people don't do that anymore. So I think there's a lot of like good faith that's currently, I guess, going around with sort of like the Steam platform, because Steam could theoretically take away your games at any moment. A publisher could decide, hey, we sold you a license, we didn't sell you a copy to own, and now we're taking away your access to that game because you bought a license. And so there's been this whole fear for a long time that because it's a license and because this is technically in sort of the fine print that they can do this, that at some point they may decide to do it. Potentially, if they keep remaking or remastering games, they might decide, hey, you owned Black Flag, Assassin's Creed, right? But we're selling you the new resynced version. So we'll take away your license to the old version that you bought. So now you have to rebuy. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying Ubisoft has done this, but I think there's this fear that in the future, as things sort of get enshittified, as everything gets enshittified, that this is sort of a potential that could be done. And that is independent of PlayStation or PC gaming or Xbox gaming or whatever. This could happen to anyone. And I don't know whether I'm just naive on this situation or whatever, but I feel like if any company attempted to do that, there would be laws changed relatively fast, especially as, people start building these digital libraries that they've spent money on. And I know a lot of politicians are like 95 years old and have absolutely no concept of how anything works in terms of technology. And so getting them to do anything is difficult. But I just feel like the general citizens of the world or whatever would not accept a company just being like, oh, so you've spent $500 on games and we told you didn't technically own them, so now we're just deleting all of your access. I think over time, things will change to the point where a license is seen as some form of irrevocable ownership. I don't know what you would class it, I guess, but sort of a system where, while you don't technically own a copy that you can give to someone else or pirate off or whatever, but you cannot just remove it from someone's library. You have to provide indefinite access to that. Would you agree with that?
Well, absolutely, I would agree with that. I'm trying to think how you actually go about it, enforcing that or ensuring that, because Steam could fold, for example, and shut down all their services and servers, and
Mm.
then presumably everything on Steam that you did own, you no longer own. Like, it just kapoof vanished. So, but having physical copies of your Steam games doesn't solve that problem either, because if they have to connect to a service and the service no longer exists, then it's just a really poor paperweight. So, but yeah, I'm fully on board with that. I completely agree. I also think, though, if a publisher, a brand, a company, a platform, whatever, went that way and started doing that kind of stuff, it'd be suicide, essentially. Like, it'd be killing your platform or whatever it is almost instantly. Like, you see the online outrage now, well, just about these discs, for example, which I don't know how widespread this is. I don't know how many people are actually outraged by this particular decision. I know there's been a huge amount of backlash, but I have to imagine if Steam or whatever, they deleted a game, like, I don't know, just pick a game, they deleted it. I think the blowback would be significantly greater than what we're seeing for the discs, the physical media. I don't know. I just feel like it's something they wouldn't do. But obviously, it's a trust me, bro type situation, and people don't like those. So I agree. I don't know what the solution is. I have no idea how you actually go about solving that problem. Physical media isn't the solution. So, yeah,
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think
How do
it's
you solve that problem?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the answers to that either. I mean, I know, for example, the Stop Killing Games movement is sort of going into this. There needs to be like an end of life sort of idea for games once they stop being supported. But that's, I guess, largely focused on those sort of live service slash multiplayer type games, as opposed to situations where you've bought a single player game on a Steam platform that you've only bought a license for, and the whole platform could shut down and the services could shut down, or a publisher could revoke access. It's kind of a different category, I guess, in a sense. So
Yeah,
whether or not games that they like force developers to offer like an executable download that you could
yeah.
store on your own media or something like that, I'm not sure.
It becomes so difficult, right? Because the obvious solution would be for a single player game, let's say a Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 type game, they have to, for a certain period of time, provide the downloadable version of the game that can be played offline with no DRM, for example. Easy fix, right? But then you sort of have to argue with the game developer, is that an easy solution for that game? Like, can they just remove the DRM or whatever and the game can be run offline, or does it have necessary server-side components because of reasons? And then it becomes this argument as to which games qualify for being able to download. Because obviously, a game like Fortnite, it would make no sense to be able to download the Battle Royale version of the game and have that as offline, because it's pointless. The whole point is to be able to play against other players. So, yeah, how you police that as well, I've got no idea.
Yeah, I think it's interesting seeing the physical lover people who are sort of like, we need games that launch off the discs and stuff like that. Like, I buy physical media because I want to ensure that if all that stuff happens, I've got a working copy of the game that I can launch on my console or whatever. And I get that opinion because there are some games where that could potentially work for. Like, if a game developer does a really great job with the version 1.0 of the game and it could fit on the disc and doesn't require updates, doesn't require online service components, isn't multiplayer, etc. Theoretically, you could have this world where the physical media has the entire game on it. You put it into your console, it works, it doesn't require any services. So long as your physical hardware console keeps working, you can play that game indefinitely for as long as you like. I think, though, that is kind of an old school way of thinking about how games are made, though. Like, I think there's very few games where that is even possible to do these days, rightly or wrongly. And I know people who are in that camp of loving physical media argue that games should be made in a way so that that whole system can work. But I feel like a lot of what we're seeing today from games is that games get better over time via these updates. So the better experience that you get is after installing and using these online service components. So I think of a game like Stalker 2 that got significant content and updates, got significant, technical fixes to the game because it didn't ship in the best technical state. You see games getting free DLCs or free changes. Crimson Desert changed a lot of the game after it was released initially. So if you had that disc version that was sort of like this ultimate physical copy that you can use forever, you'd be playing a worse version of the game than you could be getting if you used all these digital services. So I don't know whether people want to preserve like the crappy versions of games as well. Like that's an issue going down that path of sort of providing a physical version of titles. Whereas, yeah, I think ultimately at some point they're going to have to. No, I mean, I think Steam is probably a lifelong business. Like, I don't really see them going out of business or needing to shut down services anytime soon. Like, that would be one of the craziest developments in gaming, and there's no reason why they couldn't last for hundreds of years doing what they're currently doing. But if it does come to that, yeah, downloading some sort of, I guess, executable file without DRM. But again, like games are getting more complicated and stuff like that over time, integrating more online stuff. What about a game like Flight Simulator, which doesn't even have like the majority of the game files locally? Like you're constantly streaming assets from a server. How could you ever download that? Like it just becomes very, very complicated. So anyway, I guess those are our thoughts on game ownership. Unless you had any further thoughts, then we can talk a little bit about the future of GPUs.
No, I'm totally on board with the game ownership side of things. Those concerns, the physical media stuff, don't at all understand that. But as I said, it's like I'd rather just not have an opinion on that subject. Basically, like I don't care to weigh in on it. I'll let the people who have thoughts and experience and all that with that one just they can take care of that for me.
The other thing that we've been meaning to talk about for a little while now has been your video on the, I guess, progress / look maybe into the future of the Nvidia GeForce GPU line. So you went back a couple of weeks ago and looked at all of the generations from about, I think it was it 2010 or did you go back to 2005? I can't remember how far back you went, but it was many generations.
Yeah. I think it was about 2010 was when I went back to something like that.
And so in that video, you're sort of looking at the performance of the products that we were getting, the performance gain from generation to generation, the sort of price changes or the, comparing things within the same price tier and things like, I think you did a little bit of a look at the power consumption of some of the products and things like that to sort of show how, I guess, progress is slowing in terms of improvements in graphics card hardware. And how even though we've sort of in this AI boom / bubble at the moment where, GPU prices are, I guess, really bad at the moment, though probably not nearly as bad as you'd see from DDR5 modules, for example. But even then, if things go back to the sort of normal that we've sort of been talking about for a while now, that normal is not the normal of a decade ago. So I found that video very, very interesting. And I think there's a few additional things that you wanted to talk about and we can discuss in that video.
Yeah, well, off the top of my head, I can't actually remember what I want to talk about, but we'll work through it. But basically, we're at Computex. We were seeing all this, the AI craziness that can't really explain how it's a thing and how it's continuing. A lot of it just doesn't make sense. So I was thinking about all of that, why NVIDIA are doing what they're doing. And we've been aware for a long time now that the shrinking of transistors, below 7 nanometers, we're hitting the limits of physics, engineering, that stuff. It's just becoming very difficult to develop new nodes. They're becoming extremely expensive. They're taking longer to mature. So just all of those things are happening. And I got thinking about, which, this is stuff, again, we're all aware of this. This isn't news. But I guess for me personally, I don't really think about what those things mean for NVIDIA and why that might motivate them to do certain things. So, I started thinking, well, if I'm in Nvidia's shoes, I'm trying to make money selling GPUs to gamers and professionals and stuff like that. And it's becoming increasingly difficult, not just to offer new products, but have them be considerably faster than the products that came just before them. It really starts to kill the business model of making money. And then I thought it might be interesting to go back and just have a look at sort of seeing this play out over, because I've reviewed all these products. And I have a vague recollection of how it all played out, but then putting it on a timeline and seeing, and yeah, just seeing that we used to see, 150, 200% performance gains over a 5-year period from 2010 to 2015, from 2015 to 2020, and then from 20 to 25, how much that's like just rapidly slowed down. And if you're a company that's trying to sell these products to gamers to make money, it's a pretty scary outlook where, you go back 10 years, every 12 months, you were able to sell a new product and basically everyone wanted to buy it, right? Like a lot of people were upgrading generation to generation. We kind of knew that from our polling data because a lot of people said, they'll upgrade for, well, I can't remember what it was. It was like 70% of people that voted said they would upgrade for a 50% performance uplift. And that is likely a result of what people used to see in a 12 to 18 month period. And then that got out to, 2 years, 2.5 years, sort of getting to 3 years. But what was actually accelerated more than that, because that was when the product cycles were taking place. But then to achieve the 50%, you're sort of getting out to 5 years. And if it's now 5 years, how long before it's 7, 8 years? And then do we get to a point where it's 10 years or longer before you're getting a noteworthy performance uplift by upgrading your GPU? So the stagnation sets in pretty hard at that point. I don't know what the answer is there, but it's very clear that that's the direction things are heading. So again, if you're Nvidia trying to make money out of GeForce products, it becomes extremely difficult to do that. You just get to a point where people are like, well, games look good enough. And we're kind of at that point now, I would say. So they're like, we don't want to spend thousands of dollars getting these very small improvements. So just focus on making new, exciting games, I guess. But yeah, so that to me made it pretty clear as to why Nvidia's made the play they've made. Now, people will be like, oh, but it's not all about gaming. The reason Nvidia's gone all in on AI is because AI is the future and it's this exciting product and whatnot. It's like, yes, AI, well, large language models are a genuine product and they can genuinely be very good, but they aren't worth anywhere near the investment that we're currently seeing. And they're not going to achieve like artificial intelligence with the current GPUs they're putting out. Like, it's clearly a bubble.
I almost see it as kind of like a different thing, because they're not selling like an RTX 5060 to a server. Like, they've made a completely different product series that they're selling for those applications. So I think, of course, they're trying to make money as a company off the AI side of things and having these different products that can do that. But obviously the challenges that you brought up in the video are very related to the GeForce line and the continuation of the GeForce product line, which they're continuing to make. Like, they're still thinking about making new products. So it obviously has implications for that side of things. Yeah, I found the video very interesting in terms of the things that you were sort of bringing up with the slowdown of progress and that sort of thing. I think there's been a few contributing factors to this that, I guess you touched on a little bit in the video, but I'd think are probably worth expanding on a bit. And one of them, I guess, is sort of the monopoly that there is in terms of the manufacturing processes. So, even if you go back just a couple of generations, right? Nvidia made the GeForce 30 series on Samsung's 8 nanometer process. And they've largely used TSMC for most products that they've manufactured, but there has been the occasional product that they've gone, oh, okay, we'll make this on Samsung or whatever. And, there is going to be some competition there. But obviously, since the time period that you were talking about as being this sort of golden era of these big performance gains, these big improvements, there's been less and less competition in terms of the things that Nvidia can use to manufacture these products. It's basically just been TSMC. They haven't really had any other options. And so that kind of, while obviously it's been more complicated to get gains out of new process nodes, they've also had fewer options. There's just been,
Yeah,
this
I
is the
mean,
option, and so this is the price that we're going to charge for those dies or whatever. So,
yeah.
I mean, what can they really do there? Like, they've got no choice.
Yeah, that's true, but it's not like a situation where TSMC's done some sort of shady, underhanded tactic to, create a monopoly. It's just they were like, we're the ones that are going to create. Well, we're the ones that are going to make the extreme investment to get, these nodes produced, and it's going to cost a lot more money to do that. So it ends up costing a lot more money. Like Global Foundries dropped out of the race because they weren't willing to invest the billions upon billions of dollars to, achieve those cutting edge nodes. So again, it's still a result of it being extremely expensive and extremely difficult. It's not so much it being a monopoly. It's just that'll, you're right, it'll factor into it to a degree, but the underlying issue is like the limits of physics. The engineering is extremely difficult. So they're just doing a thing that's really hard and almost getting to the point of being impossible to go forward with. So it was going to be, whether there was competition or not, we were still going to head into the exact same problem. It was going to become expensive and difficult to make progress, if not impossible. So business model still faces the same issue there.
Yeah, and same with the memory as well. The lack of scaling in terms of new memory products has been a pretty significant issue. So the cost per gigabyte, obviously the cost per gigabyte has been thrown out of whack with the latest AI stuff. But prior to that, it's not like they were making 16 gigabyte modules cheaper and cheaper over time. It was pretty much like, oh well, this is kind of the cost. This is the cost for 8 gig. This is the cost for 16 gig. It is what it is, unless there was some sort of major breakthrough in terms of how they can, manufacture memory modules. That was always going to be the case. So if they wanted to offer 32 gigabytes instead of 16 gig on some sort of future product, that was always going to just cost them more money instead of being available at the same sort of price, which has been, obviously, again, thrown out of whack by the current cost of things like VRAM. But even if that wasn't a factor, that would still be an ongoing problem. And obviously, increasing the memory capacity on these graphics card products is crucial for enabling new types of gaming experiences. But I think across a lot of what you've seen from Nvidia over the last few years is them moving, like they've seen this issue obviously a while out, and that is why they have moved away from focusing on rasterization performance gains into the new areas that you've seen in terms of ray tracing and AI capabilities, which is, and at least on the AI side of things, is sort of coming to its head with DLSS 5 that they're supposedly still pushing ahead with for a launch at some point later this year. But obviously the sort of gains that you can show in a chart are going to be very different if you switched from rasterization that you focused on to ray tracing, or to, let's say, call it AI rendering or something, because obviously the GTX 1080 Ti or whatever was useless for AI rendering, and a 50 series product is much more capable of doing AI rendering tasks. It's just a matter of how does that impact the actual gaming experience that we're seeing. Rasterization is a nice, safe sort of thing. You increase the rasterization performance, and games that use that get faster. They run faster, or you can use more rasterization effects. With AI, I think they're in this position now where they've shown that things like upscaling can be done, but everything else is sort of in the, future, like let's put that in the future basket. Like we can maybe do some stuff with that processing capabilities at some point, but they're yet to sort of show that is, I guess, a good way of approaching things. You've seen the backlash to DLSS 5, for example, right? That isn't a proven technology yet. That is one thing that has sort of been focusing on, but seems very far away. And then obviously the other thing that we've talked about extensively is sort of this is ray tracing. Again, a 50 series product is much faster for ray tracing than a 10 series product that can barely do it or needs to use software techniques. But is that being sort of proven to be the future of gaming? We know it is going to be at some point, but it's been very, very slow progress in terms of, I guess, outpacing what we were seeing for rasterization. And so, I don't know whether the charts would look very different if you had looked at sort of ray tracing performance over time. But how do you sort of factor that in, though, when you've got this alternate path that you can use in a lot of games? It just becomes very complicated to track.
Well, I think that's the big threat to the business model, the big problem they have. Because really, with these GPUs, these new products, they have to convince gamers they're worth buying. They do something that the previous ones didn't do. And you saw, Jensen on stage with ray tracing. Like, you're going to want to have ray tracing in your graphics card. If you don't have it, it's just going to be junk, essentially. He didn't say that, but that's what he was alluding to. So Nvidia were trying to tell you ray tracing, ray tracing, ray tracing. They shoved that down the throat of gamers. Some people drank the Kool-Aid, a lot didn't. And, that's why they were so aggressive with us, so heavy-handed with us, that we needed to push the ray tracing narrative. They were really on the tech media to go all in on ray tracing. And that's because they really required that to keep selling GPUs at a furious pace. And DLSS 5 is the next step. It's critical for Nvidia that they are able to make a technology like DLSS 5 successful, because that is what they will use moving forward to keep selling you GPUs. Because it's a critical juncture here, because a lot of gamers will tell you they kind of don't care about graphics anymore. Like, they find the graphics to be satisfactory. You can have a great gaming experience. You can really get immersed in the game. They've really got to the point where they are acceptable and good enough, and it's not something you keep thinking, oh, I can't wait for the next gen games to do this with graphics or look this way. I think a lot of people are at a point where they're content, they're satisfied with the level of graphical fidelity we have. What they want now is games that run well, have excellent stories, are fun to play. They basically just want a good game, not better graphics. And that's a massive problem for Nvidia, because they don't make money off good games. They make money off games with better graphics. And we've heard this for ages now. Like, and it kind of ties in with this video that I made, that people are complaining about video game graphics not really improving. The games are getting way more demanding. And, there's some truths in there. We don't necessarily agree that games 10 years ago looked better. But I can understand where people are coming from, in the sense that they ran so much better relative to what we're seeing today. And the visual upgrades don't justify the performance hit. And
for sure. Like, if you compare 2005 to 2015, the games are like night and day different in terms of their look visually. But if you compare 2015 to 2025, it's been a lot slower. And yes, the performance side of things has gotten worse.
Yeah, so that's a huge problem for them. And without some sort of technology or something to push things forward, they're sort of sitting here going, well, we want you guys to pay $1,000 for a 5070 Ti, but it's not really offering anything extra. So big problem. Like, again, from the 3070 to the 5070, you're getting 50% more performance. That's a 5-year gap. Like, the best thing about the 5070 compared to the 3070 is the extra VRAM. Like, if you whacked 12 gigs on a 3070, most people wouldn't bother upgrading.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of really interesting things to go through with this one, because I 100% agree with the graphics stagnation thing, and I get the opinion of gamers that graphics are not significantly better than they were, and that it actually doesn't need to be a focus for a lot of games. A lot of games look good enough. You're not necessarily needing these wow factor games. I think that will continue to be the case. Like, the wow factor, these are the real tentpole graphical titles. That will still be a factor for the world's biggest game. So I'm thinking of like a Grand Theft Auto 6 or like The Witcher 4. There will still be these games that are pushing the technological boundaries of what graphics can achieve. But I think if you're talking about just, there's a lot of regular everyday AAA games that are released in the year. So I'm thinking of like maybe a 007 First Light or something like that. They don't need crazy graphical quality as anything outside of this sort of standard level that we're getting right now to be a good, enjoyable game that people can play. And certainly for 007, which was a well-received game, it was more about the story and the way that they'd integrated the James Bond character into that game, as opposed to, wow, this is like the future of gaming. I think one of the things that they've sort of is going to be more important over time as developers sort of figure out how we can make games more fun, right? A lot of the things are not GPU related. they're not related to the physical GPU core. One of them is, if you want to make game worlds more dense, you need more VRAM. So that's not necessarily the product that Nvidia is making, right? They don't make the VRAM, they just give you the VRAM on the product. So, if you had like an RTX 5070 with 64 gigabytes of memory, that could probably enable many, like, quite substantially different gaming experiences to what we see today in terms of things that game developers could add to the game. Draw distances popping could be significantly improved and reduced. You'd be getting many more objects and much more dense game worlds. It's not going to render lighting any differently. It's still going to give you the same sort of lighting effects, which have sort of peaked in a lot of ways, in my opinion. But all those sorts of things could be improved with VRAM. The other thing is, of course, CPU performance. A lot of the, if you want to have more NPCs, you want to have more interactivity, you want to have your multiplayer games run with more people in the game worlds, you need faster CPU performance. It's not related to the GPU necessarily. And so, again, is Nvidia making CPUs for gamers? Not at the moment. I mean, they've sort of attempted the laptop chip side of things at the moment, but that's more of a factor for other products. AMD, for example, making CPUs, and it has been held back by consoles significantly because console CPUs are very weak. And so, if we got this huge increase in CPU performance, is that going to enable more enjoyable experiences for gamers? AI processing as well is potentially the way that Nvidia can benefit from this. We've seen the demos for Ace, for example, with their AI characters in games. Is that sort of
requires a lot more VRAM, Tim?
Well, it requires more VRAM. It requires more AI processing capabilities, because if you want to have that integrated throughout the game world, you're going to need to have a lot more processing in that front. That's a way that Nvidia can potentially give people more processing power, things that will encourage you to buy a GPU in the future. But so far, they haven't. Then it doesn't seem like they're really focusing on that side of AI processing in games. They're more looking at the sort of neural rendering side of things. How do we use AI to improve graphics, which I just think is kind of like the wrong way of going down the AI path. Like, if we're talking about gamers don't necessarily want or care about higher quality graphics, why would you use AI to sort of improve that again when AI could be used for many other things in the game? Like, maybe you can get much better simulations in the game or something by using AI. And I know, AI is maybe not the best at simulating certain things, but maybe it can get better. I'm not sure. But those sorts of things could be improved. But no, NVIDIA is going down this sort of DLSS 5 path. So, and then I guess the final angle is sort of the developer. Is it going to make games easier to develop if, processing power is much more abundant, I guess? Because you've seen I think one of the, we talk about gamers don't want graphics, but I think what gamers do want is the franchises that they enjoy to not have timing differences of like 7 years, 10 years between games. I think it was just come out recently that The Elder Scrolls 6, for example, is still 2 or 3 years away, which would make it like almost 20 years since Skyrim was released. Is processing power going to make game developers have more tools at their disposal to make games easier and that sort of thing? Maybe. But again, it's like, do you necessarily need like significantly faster GPUs for that? Or is that more in VRAM? Is that more in CPU power? Is that more in the AI processing power? I'm not sure. So yeah, it's a tough time because the main core thing that NVIDIA offers is not necessarily the thing that gamers actually want to be improved significantly. So yeah, it's hard. Do you think all of this also applies to sort of what we're seeing from AMD as well? Because obviously they're not in the same dominant position that NVIDIA is in, but they do still make GPU products, and they're stumbling over it at certain points, but they are trying to improve their GPU market share. But in a lot of senses, they manufacture products on TSMC, they've got VRAM constraints, all that sort of thing. So does it also apply to Radeon?
Well, yeah, it definitely applies to Radeon. I mean, the reason I didn't cover Radeon GPUs in this video is because market share wise, they are largely irrelevant. They also have had sort of fragmented product lines over the generation. So it's difficult. I guess if you chose maybe like the $300 US price point, you could do a similar video. And I have had a lot of people request that. So it might be something I look into in the near future. But as the market leader by a long shot, it just made much more sense to look at Nvidia. And they're also, they've headed up, or they've they're well and truly at the forefront of the AI boom, certainly much more so than AMD. So I just felt AMD
Mm,
was, irrelevant from the conversation. But obviously, all of these factors apply to AMD equally. They're in the same boat, really. So yeah, I mean, it definitely affects AMD the same way. Will they come up with some sort of architectural design that allows them to do like tile-based GPUs or something that gives them, a bit more wriggle room? I mean, there's no reason why Nvidia couldn't do that as well. I'm sure they're both looking into ways to overcome these challenges. And to be clear in the video and now, I'm not saying that these challenges can't be overcome. I'm just saying they are real challenges that they're currently facing and are yet to
mm.
overcome them. So we could still see, great improvements in terms of processing power and whatnot for GeForce and Radeon GPUs for the next decades. I don't know. But yeah, just pointing out the current problem they face and why things are sort of heading in the direction that they're heading in. But yeah, for AMD, exact same problem. I mean, we've seen AMD now due to the stagnation on, DRAM improvements with capacity and whatever, capacity run into the same issues as NVIDIA. Like we're getting a 9060 XT with 8 gigabytes of VRAM, the same product, same name, also has a 16 gigabyte variant. Like they just copied NVIDIA exactly there. And it's because they have all the same problems. Like, they can't offer a 512-bit wide memory bus on those products. It just isn't economically viable. So, yeah, same problem.
Yeah, and I think while obviously this is a problem for Nvidia and AMD to sort of convince gamers to upgrade products and that sort of thing, it's not necessarily a bad thing for gamers if gamers
Mm,
don't have to spend money.
mhm,
Like if a 5070 or a 5060 was sufficient for the next however many years of games and you sort of not necessarily need to prioritize graphics or whatever, then that is I guess a good thing
yeah,
because you're saving money, right? Like especially with the upcoming console generation, which is going to anchor the sort of the next what's going to happen with the next however many years of gaming, next 10 years of gaming, and the things that they're trying to target there. If you don't actually need to purchase that console and you can still run games on your old console or your old PC hardware, then I think a lot of gamers would be very happy with that situation.
mhm.
Your things that you've bought, especially considering how expensive GPUs are lasting longer. These are things that are all, I guess, good for the industry. I think, though, one of the things that's going to be really challenging for this situation is if game developers start, and I don't want to say make games less optimized, but sort of, are
Uh,
making games faster. They're trying to get things out, save money on development costs because that's obviously becoming really unsustainable with games costing like 200 to $300 million. If they're, I guess, simplifying some of the things that they're doing, maybe not putting in that work to make it run on an 8 gigabyte GPU or not putting in the work to really, tighten up the graphics so that it's all really nicely optimized and runs on slower hardware, you're going to get this situation where games may be cheaper to develop and come out faster, but they're actually going to run worse and look the same on current hardware. I think that's going to be a problem that's really going to be really hard for gamers to swallow because
mhm.
gamers always talk about optimization and criticize optimization. But if the path forward to actually a sustainable game industry is game developers doing that, then yeah, it's going to be this really interesting situation to see where we see GPU stagnation, but games actually getting worse and harder to run for no real benefit. And so
Mhm.
I don't really know how that's going to play out because I could see obviously there'll be complaints for that situation, but I don't really see a path forward where games can still be made for these absurd budgets and yeah, where game developers are having to put in all this time and effort to make them work on cards that are too slow for the things that they're trying to do in the games.
Yeah, so there's sort of two things I think worth exploring there, and one is what you were just talking about. I think, it could go the way you're suggesting, or it could be that they recognize the slowdown, because I think it's fair to say if someone was developing a game 5 years ago and it was due to be released this year, they probably didn't expect that they would have to heavily optimize for 8 gigabytes of VRAM. That would be my assumption.
Yep.
So if that catches you out late in the development cycle, then you've got to go back and put tons of time into optimizing your game so it fits within, a certain capacity. And that was something that you were not planning for at all. And that creates a heap of extra development work. Again, I don't know it. I haven't got any insight here. This is just me making assumptions, but I think it's safe to assume that that sort of thing can happen. Whereas if if they're only halfway through a development or starting to develop a game now, and it looks, it's obvious that this stagnation has occurred, they would probably start targeting more or less the hardware we have now rather than assumptions of future hardware. So you wouldn't be targeting like a 5090 of today. You'd probably going for more of a 5070 for developing stuff. So maybe that will help improve the optimization of future games, that they're not shooting for hardware configurations that don't end up materializing. Maybe, not sure. To change the topic almost entirely, but sort of still stay within what we're trying to talk about here. For me, it's almost like when it comes to games, I'm seeing a situation where I liken it to, like, do you remember, the Simpsons already did it type meme? Where I feel like that's a big problem for gaming just in general. They're trying to create new games that are thrilling in some new way. They have some new mechanic or do something new. And I'm not saying that can't be done anymore, but it's just becoming obviously increasingly difficult to make a new game, to make a game that isn't just comes across as a clone of another game. And we're seeing this across all of human invention. Like, movies now suck because, the good movies are like rehashes of good movies, and coming up with like good stories is really difficult. They are still happening. It's just few and far between. And so with video games, it's like, imagine being tasked with, Tim, you've got to go make a new exciting video game. And this is, again, why the development costs are so big. The game has to be bigger and better than any other game. It has to have new game mechanics, has to have a thrilling, exciting, engaging story, but it can't be like all the other stories that have been told already. So we need new, fun, exciting story, new game mechanics, and then we need the game to be like big, right? So it can't just be, we don't want a 10-hour campaign. We don't want, it has to be this huge world, this mega blockbuster thing, and that's our AAA title. Good luck making that. Like, that just sounds, because, I think people sort of lose sight of this. Back in the day, an exciting game, and again, there were genuinely cool games, but gaming seemed more exciting because a game did this thing, and it was pretty simple, but no one had done it before. It wasn't like a 60-hour campaign. It was just a game that did something relatively new, and it was exciting for a bit, and that was cool. But again, achieving that now, because like the Simpsons already did it meme, is so insanely difficult. I would not want to be sitting there having to come up with a new game that has a great story, ticks all the boxes. That's why game development costs so much now. I mean, it's one of the reasons. So I'm not attributing, whenever we have these conversations, people are like, I can't believe you think it's just this, or what about this, and this? I'm saying, guys, this is a factor. All right. There are other factors. I'm not saying people who are saying other things are wrong. I'm just saying this is another thing to consider. And would you agree?
Oh, for sure. Like, you can see why companies are sort of going to the remaster or remake sort of thing, where they've taken a game that is already was proven to be successful and people liked, and just sort of, I guess, bringing it up to modern standards in terms of the visuals or, the feel of the game or whatever. And we just saw that with Assassin's Creed, but they've done it for many games, whether it's remasters or full remakes. Resident Evil has done it for multiple titles, and those games have been a big success, because once you've got this formula that you've sort of shown to have worked at some point in the past, you can bring it to new audiences that didn't play that game, or just allow people to enjoy the newer version of it if they have played it already. I think there are certainly some things that I've seen in mechanically or sort of in the design of games that is limited by the hardware that we've got today, and things that could enable sort of new experiences that are not really possible. But I think it really takes a certain type of game to have that make any sense. So if you're making like a Battlefield title or a multiplayer shooter, for example, you're pretty much just like, how do you innovate on that? You've pretty much all the formats. There's all the formats, right?
It's
Like,
the COD problem, right? We've got another COD game,
yeah,
looks like COD, feels like COD, and now pay $100 for it. It's like, just stop
yeah,
making COD, please. Stop making COD. One COD game. COD's like Fortnite, right? You've made it. Don't, there could be three. There could be like the World War II version, the Black Ops, and the Modern Warfare. Stop it. Just don't make another one. just
yeah.
keep
Obviously,
updating maps and things.
yeah, you keep it fresh with some new maps, but the core mechanics stay the same. I think where I see potential innovation coming with games is more games that are trying the simulation side of things. So a world
Mhm.
simulation where you've got they're sort of fulfilling the endless possibilities type of things. So games I sort of see in that category, I expect GTA 6 to be in this category when it's released later this year, but also games like Baldur's Gate 3, where it's well known how you can sort of kill any character in the game and the story sort of shifts around it. Or a game like Hitman, where you can, you're given this sort of sandbox environment. There's mechanics you can use, and so you can go about trying to solve the puzzles or solve the story beats through multiple different paths. And obviously, you get to a point where you can only simulate so much stuff on the hardware that you're running. You can only have so many NPCs, so many characters. And so, if they wanted to take those sort of things to the next level, they probably would require, additional processing power to sort of, have all the no loading screens between certain areas and things like that. That all requires, more capabilities and things like that. Starfield is probably an example where they sort of failed to do that. They had this promise of having all these planets and things that were procedurally generated, but then the procedural generation just made all the planets boring. Now, I'm sure there's a future there where you could make a game like Starfield where all the like there was thousands of planets or whatever, but they were all like interesting, exciting planets. Obviously, they couldn't do that with the current hardware capabilities, the current development timeframes and stuff like that. But I'm sure things like that are possible. And then, yeah, story side of things, obviously that's a challenge because you need really talented writers to come up with new and interesting things that you see in games. So that's obviously going to be, I guess, difficult. But yeah, a lot of games are sort of falling into the repetitive sort of side of things. Going for, let's make an open world, and now you've got, however many checkbox elements that you've got to go around and finish, and the story is sort of a second citizen to that, and we're going to have some boss fights that you can go find in the world, and you're going to have some raids that you can do, and that sort of thing. I mean, all those sorts of formulas I think have been done to death a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I definitely see those challenges with gaming moving forward, and it's going to take, yeah, I guess a lot of talent is probably the best way of putting it to overcome those things. It's not something that you can just sort of brute force with better hardware or whatever. You need people who are really interested in game design. But yeah, obviously, what we see in the market today is there's a few multiplayer games that have sort of become the multiplayer games, and trying to break in that market with any sort of new idea is virtually impossible. You get maybe one game a year that sort of becomes a hit that has ongoing success. But outside of that, people just continuing to play Counter-Strike, Fortnite, Valorant, the Apex Legends, the existing games, even Call of Duty and Battlefield are sort of in there to some extent, but not as successful as those other titles. And so I feel like potentially the future of game development is a lot less investment in sort of new multiplayer experiences, because it's kind of like, I kind of see it like, how would you describe this? Physical sports, right? Like, are people coming up with new physical sports to challenge like soccer, Australian rules football, cricket? Like, cricket made a new format, T20, like 20 years ago, and then that they changed
Yeah,
the
it's
rules
rare. Like,
occasionally.
I think probably one of the most recent examples that popped to my head is maybe like the UFC.
It's still been around for a while though, hasn't it? Like, they're not coming up with a new
Uh,
UFC every year, are they? It's
no, but
like,
it was like a mega fast growing sport. Like, there was combat sports, obviously, that was karate and wrestling
yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff, and it
yeah.
sort of meshed those things together to create like a mixed martial arts. Like, so,
It's a
but
variation of that.
what,
Yeah.
yeah, what I'm saying is it became this mega thing, though. It wasn't like this, sort of niche side sport, or it became more of a mainstream thing. But anyway, it's not an entirely new thing. But yeah, this is the problem that the game world faces. Um,
Yeah.
I would love nothing more than to have a new StarCraft. StarCraft 2 was amazing. Love that game. Still going today. Not that many people play it because, I played it for many, many, many years. But there's no point making a StarCraft 3 really, which is why they haven't done it, because you can't really iterate on what they have. It'd just be the same kind of game dressed up slightly. So it's like the
Yeah. And
formula's there.
and strategy games are becoming, I would say, probably less popular over time. If you sort of look at where players are going for their game time, strategy games were very popular a while ago and sort of have dwindled a bit in terms of the success that you see from newer strategy games. Obviously, they still make them and people still play them, but they're not as dominant of a genre.
I think it's just, again, victim of lack of innovation. Again, like there's not really a better example than, say, for RTS games, I would say there's no real better example than StarCraft 2. Like, they've made games since then, haven't been as good, haven't done as well. So if you've played StarCraft 2 and you loved StarCraft 2, you're either still playing it or you've got sick of playing it and you're looking for something else to play, but there's nothing else to play, so you've just gone and played something else.
Well, and a lot of growth in gaming has been casual gaming. So, there's that Mecha Chameleon game that's come out recently that's sort of, a real hit in terms of like a very casual multiplayer game. But then, you contrast that to, real-time strategy games, which are quite deep and complex and require a lot of learning to get really good in them. And so creating a new version of that runs into that sort of barrier where how do you encourage casual audiences that are sort of largely playing those sort of easier, more casual multiplayer games to invest the time into a real-time strategy game? The audience has just changed so much since the time that those games were really, really popular. I still think, in a way, how we continue to see, new TV shows and new movies being made, and there are people telling really interesting and new, unique stories in there. I still think there's a really strong future for single player gaming. There's still many, many things that can be told and done in that sort of genre. But yeah, in terms of the multiplayer thing, it really does seem to be consolidating into the mega games that are continuing to get updated, these big live service things. And I think where a lot of developers have fallen over is, instead of going for what is potentially, maybe you can make a safe, slightly profitable or break-even single-player game, they've sort of taken the risk on, let's break into this live service multiplayer ecosystem, and have failed because, it's really hard to break into that market and make a game that people want to play long-term, has a good success, and that sort of thing. And a lot of money, I feel, is wasted on trying to develop and create those types of games, and that it's so difficult to succeed.
It's because individual games simply can't do that. Like Fortnite, as just a battle royale game, can't do that and wouldn't have done that. It's just Fortnite's evolved into so much more than that. There's that, like, you could argue what the main game mode is now, whether it's like the traditional battle royale or if it's reload. And then, there's other modes, and then it's the whole creative thing, like a Roblox type deal where, people can create their own stuff, Epic create their own stuff, and people are split all across the platform, which traditionally I would have thought wouldn't work that well, because when, say, Call of Duty released a DLC, it would fragment the player base, make finding games, the load times longer and whatnot, and it kind of sucked. But I guess with a game like Fortnite being an open platform and it all free, you don't run into that same issue. Like, people can freely move around and play different things with their friends and stuff. So that works really well. Speaking of Call of Duty, when we're talking about the physical media and stuff, and the concerns and outrage and whatever, I feel like people should be looking into and far more concerned about the fact that people keep buying overpriced Call of Duty games that die out faster. like we've got Modern Warfare 4 coming up later this year. How much is that going to cost to buy? It's going to be a game that people won't even play for a year. And they just keep churning them out, and somehow people keep still buying them. I feel like that's a bigger problem. That needs to be addressed.
Well, yeah, I don't really get that, but I don't get a lot of multiplayer. Like, I don't get really the success of a lot of multiplayer games. So what would I know? Once something takes off, I guess it takes off. But yeah, developers trying to find that next thing that takes off. yeah, it's just the amount of money that must be getting synced into finding that next hit must be like astronomical. The amount of because
Yeah.
once you have the hit, it's like a money printing machine. Like you develop a
Unless it
Fortnite.
goes, yeah, unless it goes. See, like to give Epic credit with Fortnite, for example, that game could have died a long time ago. But the reason it's still relevant today, it still has a huge player base and is one of the most successful games, is because so much work goes into keeping the game fresh, updated, the various different modes. Like, as I said, it's difficult to say what Fortnite is. Like, it's not just one game or one game mode. You could say it's easily 6 games. And they keep all of them updated and fresh. So if you do play it regularly, even if you cycle out for like a week or two and you come back to it, there's all this new stuff, new mechanics, and it's often very fun. So that's how it's remained relevant. Whereas some of these other games that try to do what Fortnite's doing, but they don't do all that extra work, it just goes stale really quickly. The player base falls away and never comes back, and it ends up being a dead game. So if you're going to do like I don't understand personally how the Call of Duty business model works, or even Battlefield for that. Like there shouldn't be another Battlefield. Like it just doesn't really make sense to make another one. You should just update the existing game, kind of like they do with Fortnite. But anyway, that's a separate topic, and I think that's why those games keep struggling, because they're just not doing it as well as some of the other games in that space.
Yeah, well, even with like a Call of Duty and a Battlefield, I'm sort of classing those as live service success games because they're profitable and all that sort of thing. Like Call of Duty is extremely profitable franchise, despite how it doesn't really make sense that people keep buying it every year and that sort of thing. So, but I'm thinking more of companies that spend like $200 million making a game and then like no one plays it or whatever.
Yeah.
Fortnite apparently makes like $5 billion a year in revenue, which is probably more than it cost. Like that's probably more than the total cost that they've spent on the game's entire life. So when I'm sort of saying like a money printing machine, once you get into a position where maybe you've spent a few $100 million on the game, but it's generating $200 million a year even, which is far lower than what Fortnite generates. You've got this highly successful thing because each additional year that you're making that amount of money, it's just pure profit essentially.
Yeah.
And yeah, you could put a few developers on, refreshing it, keeping the content, new and all that sort of thing. But it feels like a lot of developers are trying to get to that. They're trying to break into that market so where they can have spent a certain amount of money, but it just continues to print money forever. But I feel like over time, especially with the newer generation of gamers coming up, largely sticking to just a couple of multiplayer titles, it's like creating a new sport. Like you just can't create a new sport. There's the things that people play. And then if you're not interested in playing sports, you go to the other things. So if you don't like cricket, you don't like soccer, you don't like, rugby or whatever sport is popular in your country, what do? Oh, you watch a TV show or you play a video game or something, right? That's where I feel multiplayer games are largely at the moment. And yeah, sort of like how in, AFL and cricket and a lot of sports, they do tweak the rules. They do change the season formats. They try and shake things up a little bit in terms of keeping people interested. AFL does that a lot in terms of changing rules and changing the format and adding new rounds and stuff.
They changed the price of the battle pass.
But yeah, ultimately you're not going to get AFL 2, for example. Like it's just there'd be no point developing AFL 2 because no one's going to play it.
Yeah. You have to buy all new stuff if you want to watch AFL 2. None of your original AFL merchandise.
That's right.
Like season passes.
It's a different ball. You need different boots. Need a different ground. Like you can't play it on the same shape of ground. Like that is essentially what trying to create a live service game and have it be successful today is like doing. And you're gonna get the occasional like Mecha Chameleon that I referred to earlier. I don't think that game is going to be played in like 5 years from now, for example. There's games like that have their moment where a lot of people play it and they have fun with it with friends. But once that mechanic sort of runs its course, people move on to the sort of next title or whatever. But yeah, trying to make one of those core games like a Fortnite, I don't see it happening. I think it's pretty much over for that. The games that we have now are the games that we have. So anyway, I think that's probably should wrap up our conversation on the future of things. We've talked a little bit about, ownership of media and then GPUs and then, the future as we see it for gaming. So hopefully you guys have found that interesting, but we should take a break and then we'll quickly talk about our boring lives. And we're back to talk about boring life stuff. Now, the reason why I didn't do a podcast last week is because I had a bit of a family emergency. So that's pretty much all that has happened in my life recently. Not going to talk too much about that. And I've just been sick since that point. So I haven't been doing a whole lot outside of...
We definitely should have talked amongst ourselves before doing this spot because, I've been sick. I've been sick and I've been working. So...
fun times for us, hey?
Not too much outside of that. Well, my kids are on school holiday, so I've been playing a few games with them and stuff. So the weather's been absolutely atrocious, as you alluded to at the start of the podcast. Freezing cold. So we haven't done too many outdoor activities. It's mostly just been inside, under the heater, playing a few video games and stuff like that. So I've been doing that with both my daughters as much as I can between all the other work we've been doing. But there's nothing, I don't think there's anything really that I can come up with for you. So the segment's a bit of a bust to this podcast, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's a bit disappointing that nothing much has been happening. I'm continuing to track our old teams in the AFL. I saw that Melbourne had a pretty crazy game last weekend when they faced Hawthorn down in Tasmania, where the score was like 90-9 or something at halftime, and then Hawthorn went on a run of kicking like 10 goals in a row. So that was pretty exciting, though I did think that Melbourne had pretty much won the game at halftime, and there was absolutely no chance Hawthorn would win. But that was interesting, and the Crows just continue to chug along as usual. So who do we play? Adelaide plays the Suns this week.
Suns, yeah. That'll be an interesting matchup.
Yes, not sure how that one will go. Melbourne's got an easy win coming up against Richmond.
You're not a Melbourne supporter. Melbourne never has an easy match coming up. This could be a very challenging match.
They lose. No.
You would have said that when we broke Essendon's, 17 or 18 losing streak?
Maybe. That was earlier in the season, though, where things can always get a little bit crazy. But now that Essendon are ultra bad, and Richmond are ultra bad as well, there'll be a pretty significant upset, I would say. But
it's at
you never
the MCG,
know, I guess.
So the Melbourne Cricket Ground, for those that aren't familiar. I've been racking my brain, Tim. I don't really have anything else for you. So we'll have to leave it at that, I guess.
Yeah, nothing much has been happening, really. Australia got bundled out of the FIFA World Cup, unfortunately. So that was disappointing to see, but have to always switch our allegiance to some other team as it progresses through the rest of it. So as you can see, I've just been coughing pretty crazily, so a bit irritated at the moment. So maybe we should probably end the old podcast episode, hey?
Yeah, I'll work on trying to come up with something boring for next week. Hopefully we're both not sick by then. We've got a week to recover, Tim.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Well, this podcast is probably going too long for me considering I was sick to begin with, so let's just end it. I don't know what has happened in the last couple of minutes, but it's gone real bad, so it happens, I guess. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening to the end of this podcast, and if you're hoping for more in this boring life segment, we'll get to some real boring stuff. We'll paint some walls and watch them dry and go do some golf and all that sort of thing. All the boring stuff in life. So, we'll do that for next week and keep you all informed about what's going on. But thanks for watching and listening to the end of this podcast episode. Hopefully there's some interesting news topics and other things to talk about by the time we come around to doing this podcast next week. But you can obviously support us on Patreon if you want to get access to the supporter feed of this podcast ad-free. It also goes up slightly earlier on there if you're interested. Outside of that, that's it for this one. And we'll see you in the next one.